I am Nola Flores, 32 years old, and I am a commander in the United States Navy SEALs. On my wedding day, at a historic church in Virginia, in front of 142 guests, the first three rows, the ones decorated with white ribbons reserved for family, were empty. My father, my mother, and my brother, not a single one came. It was the most absolute and public humiliation. When I called my brother in desperation, the only text I got back was, "Don't expect much from us." They thought that absence would break me, that I would kneel and beg. They didn't know that by not showing up, they had just handed me the key to my own freedom. If you're watching, let me know where you're from in the comments. And please subscribe if you've ever been treated like an outsider by the people you love most on the most important days of your life. The silence on the other side of those heavy church doors was louder than any explosion I'd ever experienced. I stood in the vestibule of that old, beautiful Episcopal church in Norfolk, the air thick with the scent of lilies and old polish. Through the crack in the door, I could see them. 142 guests. My gaze swept over the crowd, recognizing faces that had been through hell and back with me. My team from Coronado, stoic in their chairs, my command staff from Naval Station Norfolk, officers in their immaculate dress uniforms, and then, them. The first three pews on the bride's side, empty. Utterly, aggressively empty. The ushers had still placed the white silk ribbons across the ends, just as we'd planned. Now, they looked less like decoration and more like police tape, cordoning off a void. My stomach clenched. This was it. This was the moment. I took a deep breath, the same measured, diaphragmatic breath I take just before stepping out of the bay of a C-130 into the dark. But this was different. When you jump from a plane, you trust your parachute. You trust your training. Here, my parachute had just been ripped to shreds. This jump felt infinitely scarier. The music started. The deep, resonant chords of the organ signaled it was time. There was no father's arm to take. No proud patriarch to walk me down the aisle, just me. I pushed the door open. The sound of my own heels on the marble floor was deafening. Click, clack, click, clack. It wasn't a procession. It was a march, lonely and determined. I could feel the eyes of every guest on me, their polite smiles freezing, their heads tilting in confusion, and then pity. That was the worst part. The pity. I kept my chin up, my shoulders back, my training kicked in. Never show them they got to you. I focused on the end of the aisle, on David. He stood there, so handsome in his tux, his eyes locked on mine. He smiled, a real, solid smile. But I knew his face better than my own. I saw the pain in his eyes, not for himself, but for me. He wasn't embarrassed. He was heartbroken for me. He knew exactly what this public rejection was costing me. I finally reached him. He took my hand. The Navy chaplain, a man who had seen combat and understood sacrifice, began to speak. He spoke of loyalty, of endurance, of commitment in the face of adversity. I almost laughed, a bitter, silent laugh that died in my throat. I had sworn my loyalty to my country. I had endured Hell Week. And now, I was swearing my loyalty to David. But the blood oath, the one I was born into, where was that? David squeezed my hand as we prepared to say our vows. His hand was so warm, so steady, a grounding force. "I'm here," he whispered, so low only I could hear. And in that moment, that was the only truth that mattered. "I do," I said, my voice clear and steady. It didn't even waver. I held back the tears. Not because I was strong, but because of rigid military discipline. You do not break down. You do not cry when you're cold, exhausted, or starving, and you absolutely do not cry in front of your subordinates. My team was in the fourth row. I was their commander. I could not fall apart. I was a SEAL. I would complete the mission. And this ceremony was now, officially, a mission. The reception was held at a beautiful venue overlooking the Norfolk Harbor. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the water where you could see the gray hulls of the destroyers docked at the naval base. My new family, David's family, was wonderful. His aunts and uncles from Ohio and Pennsylvania, all warm smiles and hearty handshakes, welcomed me. David's mother, a prime example of that unfailing, casserole-bearing Midwestern kindness, pulled me into a tight, soft hug. She smelled like Chanel No. 5. "You have us now, Nola," she whispered, patting my back. "You're our daughter now." She was a wonderful woman, a perfect mother. And she had no idea that her words, spoken with such pure, unconditional love, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I was supposed to have a family already. Her kindness only magnified what I had lost. It highlighted the gaping hole my own mother, my own father, had left. I spent the next 2 hours smiling. I smiled so hard my face ached. I thanked people for coming. I laughed at the best man's speech. I danced my first dance with David, resting my head on his chest, just trying to breathe. But part of me wasn't there. A small, stupid, childish part of me kept glancing at the main entrance every time the doors opened. I was still hoping that my father would appear, looking flustered, holding a set of keys and blaming traffic on I-64. Hoping my mother would rush in behind him, apologizing. Hoping for any excuse, a flat tire, a medical emergency, anything that would make this make sense. But they never came. The doors only opened for waiters carrying trays of champagne and guests leaving for the night. The hope died a little more with every passing hour. Later that night, we were in the hotel suite. It overlooked the harbor, the lights of the city, and the naval base sparkling on the dark water. It was supposed to be the most romantic night of my life. My phone was on the nightstand, dark. I'd checked it obsessively. Not one missed call, not one text message, not congratulations, not "we're sorry," not even an angry "how dare you." Nothing. The void was the message. I stood by the window, my back to David, staring at the silhouette of the USS Wisconsin. I felt him come up behind me. He didn't try to kiss me or make it romantic. He just wrapped his arms around my waist and rested his chin on my shoulder, holding me steady. We stood in silence for a long time. "You don't have to keep waiting anymore, Nola," he said quietly, his voice vibrating through me. "You can stop checking your phone." I tensed. He knew. "Family isn't the people who are supposed to show up," he continued, his grip tightening just a little. "It's the people who do." I turned in his arms and buried my face in his chest. He just held me. He was my anchor. He was the one solid thing in a world that had just dissolved. I managed a small smile for him. I kissed him. I told him I loved him. But later, much later, when his breathing was deep and even and I knew he was asleep, I slipped out of bed. I went into the cold marble bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the sink faucet, letting the water rush into the basin just to cover the sound. And then I slid down the wall, sat on the tile floor, and I finally broke. I pressed my fist into my mouth and sobbed, trying to make no sound. It wasn't pretty crying. It was the ugly, silent, gut-wrenching kind that tears you apart from the inside. All my training, all my discipline, all the walls I had built, they all crumbled. The pain was acute, worse than anything I'd ever felt. Worse than the cold of the Pacific during Bud S. Worse than the exhaustion of Hell Week. Because that was pain with a purpose. That was pain that built you. This was pain that just destroyed. The sun rose the next morning over the harbor, mocking me with its cheerfulness. The awful, crushing silence from the night before had followed me into the daylight. David and I were on the hotel balcony, trying to pretend. Trying to salvage something of a honeymoon. We were sipping coffee, not really tasting it, the air between us still heavy with the unspoken. My phone, which had been a black, dead-weight brick of silence all night, was on the table between us. And then it pinged. The sound was so loud in the quiet morning, it made me jump. My heart did a stupid, hopeful leap. Maybe, just maybe, they're sorry. Maybe they woke up and realized what they did. I picked up the phone. The hope vanished, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. It was from my father. There was no "congratulations," no "I'm sorry we missed it," no "Are you okay?" It was a text that read, "We'll need $400 for your brother's wedding. You have always been the responsible one." I read it twice, 3 times. The audacity of it, the cold transactional gall of it, sucked the air from my lungs. He hadn't just ignored my wedding. He was now, less than 24 hours later, invoicing me for my golden boy brothers, using my one compliment, responsible, as a weapon to manipulate me. I handed the phone to David without a word. I watched his face as he read it. His jaw tightened, and a muscle I'd never seen before twitched. His expression went hard. "Don't answer this, Nola," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Don't even engage. Just delete it." He was right, of course. That was the logical, healthy response. But as I looked at the message, something inside me, something that had been beaten down for 20 years, finally snapped. "No," I said. My voice was calm, cold. I took the phone from his hand. I opened my banking app. "Nola, what are you doing?" I ignored him. I typed in my father's account number, which I still knew by heart. I typed in the amount, $1 years. In the memo line, I typed, "Best of luck." I hit send. I watched the confirmation screen pop up. And then, I went into his contact, scrolled down to the bottom, and hit block this caller. "Done," I said. I took a sip of my coffee. It was the first time in 24 hours I could actually taste it. Why did I do it? Why the $1? Because that $8,400 wasn't about money. It was never about money. It was about control. It was the same control he'd wielded over me my entire life. It was the same control as when I was 17. I had saved up all summer working the sticky, sweet-smelling counter at the local Dairy Queen to buy my own prom dress. It was a simple navy blue dress, but I had earned it, and I loved it. I came downstairs, my date, a nice, nervous kid from my physics class, waiting at the door. My father, the headmaster, looked me up and down. His lip curled in that way that always made my stomach drop. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice final. "What? Why?" "You look cheap," he said, loud enough for my date to hear. "And this boy," he added, gesturing to him with a dismissive wave, "is not worthy of this family. Go back to your room." It wasn't a discussion, it was a verdict. I turned around, my face burning with a humiliation so profound it stung more than a slap. I ran back upstairs and cried all night, listening to the sound of my younger brother, the golden boy, being allowed to take the car and go to a party, even though he hadn't even bothered to do his homework. I was cheap, he was golden. That was the rule. It was the same control as my senior year of high school. My one dream, the only thing I wanted, was to get into the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis. It was my escape. It was my future. I worked my tail off. I got the grades, the recommendations, the athletic scores. I applied. And then I waited. April came and went. May. I checked the mailbox every single day, my heart pounding, waiting for that large, important-looking envelope. Nothing. Just junk mail and my mother's magazines. It wasn't until July, long after I'd given up and resigned myself to a local community college, that I found it. I was cleaning my father's home office, a task he assigned me every summer. Tucked under a stack of old financial papers, I saw the distinctive Naval Academy crest. It was my acceptance letter. It had been opened. I confronted him, the letter shaking in my hand. "You hid this from me." He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just adjusted his glasses, looking at me as if I were a difficult student. "I was protecting you," he said calmly. "The military is no place for a woman, especially not my daughter. It's unrefined." "You didn't protect me," I whispered, the rage making me tremble. "You sabotaged me." He just shrugged. "You'll thank me one day. Now, go finish the vacuuming." He hadn't protected me. He wanted to control me. He wanted to keep me in Richmond, under his thumb, where he could dictate my life. I had to go to community college for a full year before I could reapply, and finally get out. He never, ever admitted what he did. And he never forgave me for leaving. Years later, when I graduated from Bud S at Coronado, When I became one of the first 3 women ever to make it through SEAL training, I sent home a picture. Me, exhausted, covered in sand, but grinning, wearing my uniform. My mother called me, her voice a nervous whisper, as always. I got the photo, dear. It's nice. Did Dad see it? I asked. A pause. Yes. He just said to tell you not to get cocky. Don't get cocky. One of the hardest achievements in the entire US military, and that's what he said. But when my brother, finally graduated from college, after 6 years, 3 different schools, and 2 DUIs that my father quietly handled, he threw him a massive party. A marquee on the lawn, catering from a country club, half of Richmond invited to celebrate. My father toasted his son's perseverance. My achievements were always minimized because they exposed my brother's failures. My success was a mirror he refused to look in. So you see, that $1 I sent wasn't just a dollar. If you've ever felt that way, if you've ever had your biggest accomplishments brushed aside or been told, don't get cocky when you just wanted to hear, I'm proud of you, please hit that like button to show your support. And if this feels familiar, just comment, I see you, below. Because I see you. That $1 was 20 years of being told I was cheap. It was 20 years of being sabotaged for my own good. It was 20 years of being the responsible one who was expected to clean up every mess and pay for every mistake, while the golden boy got the party. That $1 was 20 years of resentment packed into a single digital best of luck. It was me, finally, after 32 years, saying, I'm done. The $1 transfer and the block felt decisive. It felt final. For about a week, there was peace. A cold, empty, and blessed silence. It was the first time in my life I hadn't been braced for the next incoming text, the next criticism, the next demand. But the silence started to feel unnatural. Like the dead quiet in the air right before an explosion. In a moment of weakness, a moment of that old, ingrained guilt, I made a mistake. I thought maybe I went too far. Maybe he's just an old man. What if he has a heart attack and he can't reach me? So I unblocked his number. It was a colossal, tactical error. The messages flooded in instantly, as if he'd been sitting there, just waiting. They were no longer manipulative. They were pure, uncut rage. You think you're smart? You petty little girl. After everything I did for you, this is the thanks I get? You're an embarrassment. Stop shaming this family, Nola. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my thumbs itching to fight back, to list every wrong, every slight, every hidden letter and broken prom night. But I stopped. I remember the words of my first SEAL instructor back in Coronado, a man who seemed to be carved from granite. He told us during Hell Week, gentlemen and lady, do not ever let the enemy know your emotional state. Silence is the greatest answer to disrespect. It drives them insane. So I held to my training. I stayed silent. I didn't reply to a single text. I simply read them, let the venom sting, and then deleted them, one by one. But my instructor was right. It did drive my father insane. My silence was a new boundary he couldn't breach, and it infuriated him. His response was to escalate. He couldn't get to me through the phone, so he decided to get to me in person. A few weeks later, I was in my office on the base at Norfolk, going over deployment logistics. My door was open. My executive officer, Chief Ramos, knocked on the frame. Ma'am, you have a minute. Sure, Chief. What's up? Ramos stepped in, but he looked uncomfortable. He was a solid operator, a man I'd trust with my life, and he was fidgeting, avoiding eye contact. Well, it's a little weird, ma'am. Spit it out, Chief, I said, leaning back in my chair. I was at the diner this morning, the one just off base by Gate 4, the one we all go to. I nodded. I knew it well. Greasy eggs, terrible coffee, but it was ours. I saw your father, ma'am. My blood went cold. My father? In Norfolk? Yes, ma'am, he was sitting at the counter. He started talking to me. I was in civilian clothes, but he must have recognized me from, I don't know, a picture or something. He started asking about you. A prickle of ice ran down my spine. What kind of questions? Ramos looked at his feet. He was asking where you worked on base, what building. He asked about your hours, when you came and went. Ma'am, he was asking about your schedule. The air left the room. This was Naval Station Norfolk. You don't ask about the in and out schedule of a SEAL commander. You don't probe for that kind of information. That is a security breach. I kept my voice perfectly level. And what did you tell him, Chief? I told him that information was confidential, sir. I told him I wasn't at liberty to discuss command operations. He didn't like that. He called me unhelpful and left. Ramos looked at me, his eyes full of concern. Ma'am, is everything all right? It felt off. Everything is fine, Chief. You handled that perfectly. Thank you for letting me know. That's all. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. And left, closing the door behind him. The second the latch clicked, I put my head in my hands. He was here. He wasn't just texting. He was here. He had driven the 3 hours from Richmond to Norfolk. He wasn't just trying to get under my skin. He was hunting me. Norfolk was my city. The base was my sanctuary. This office was the one place on Earth where I was in complete control, where my authority was absolute. This was my turf. And he had just invaded it. He had come here, found my subordinate, and started digging for information. In that moment, he turned me right back into that scared 17-year-old girl in the prom dress, the one whose life he could control with a single, dismissive sentence. I suddenly felt exposed, unsafe. That night, I went home to David and I tried to pretend everything was normal, but every sound made me jump. The thud of the evening paper on the porch, a car door slamming down the street. David found me, late at night, walking through the dark house. What are you doing, Nola? I was checking the deadbolt on the front door, for the 3rd time. He saw the look on my face. It's him, isn't it? What did he do? I told him about Chief Ramos, about the diner. David's face hardened. What is he trying to do? Seriously, is he trying to get you to give him that money? I shook my head, a terrible cold realization dawning on me. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You still don't get it, David. He doesn't need the money. He's a headmaster at a prestigious private school. He has money. Then what? What does he want? I looked at the lock on my door, the one I suddenly felt was completely useless. He wants control, I said. He had it for 32 years, and I just took it away. He's here to take it back. The text messages stopped after that. The silence that followed was even worse. Then, about a week later, the letter came. It didn't come to my home. It came to my office. It came through the official base mail system, routed through the secure mailroom, and delivered to my desk by a young yeoman. It was a plain, cream-colored envelope. My name and rank were written on the front in my father's familiar, severe, left-slanting handwriting. Commander Nola Flores. Naval Station, Norfolk. My hands were shaking. I waited until I was alone. Then I slid my regulation knife under the flap. It wasn't a letter. It was a single page. No, dear Nola, no date, no greeting. It just said, Nola, you've forgotten where you come from. You think you're better than us. You aren't. You're just that same ungrateful, difficult girl you always were. You will die alone with those medals. That is your future. No signature, no closing. It was a curse. I read it once, then twice. I didn't burn it. I didn't tear it up. I stood up, walked to my desk, and opened the top right-hand drawer. I put the letter inside. My hand brushed against the cold, reassuring weight of my standard issue pistol. I placed the letter right underneath it. It was no longer a family problem. It was no longer a letter. It was a threat. I couldn't sleep. The threat, now physical and sitting in my desk drawer, was a ghost in the house. It followed me from room to room. Every shadow seemed darker. Every floorboard creak sounded like an intruder. The adrenaline that had surged when I first read the letter had long since faded, replaced by a cold, gnawing anxiety. It was 2 in the morning. David was asleep, but my mind was spinning, replaying my father's words. You will die alone with those medals. I got up, my feet silent on the cold hardwood floors. I went to the kitchen. I sat at the table in the dark, my back to the wall. A habit I could never break. And I did the only thing my training had ever taught me to do when I was under extreme stress. I began to clean my service pistol. I'd already field stripped it twice that week. It was immaculate. But the ritual, the familiar click of the slide, the smell of the cleaning solvent, the precise, mechanical movements, it was a meditation. It was the only thing that made my hands feel steady. I was so focused on reassembling the slide that I didn't hear David until he was right there. He didn't flip on the lights, which I was grateful for. The harsh overhead glare would have felt like an interrogation. Instead, he just pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down in the dark. The only light came from the small oven clock, casting a pale green glow over the pieces of my gun on the table. He sat in silence for a long time, just watching my hands work. What are you doing, Nola? He finally asked, his voice gentle, not accusatory. Cleaning my weapon, I said, my voice flat. He let out a long, slow breath. No, he said softly. You're not. You're preparing for battle. You're in SEAL mode. I stopped, my hand hovering over the barrel. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, careful to avoid the solvent. You don't have to do this. This isn't a war you fight with that. I looked at him, the anxiety suddenly cracking, letting the exhaustion seep through. He's hunting me, David. He came to my base. He sent a threat to my office. What am I supposed to do? David looked at the pieces of the gun, then back at me. You are the most disciplined human being I've ever met. You've detrained yourself from every civilian weakness to become who you are. What's your point? My point is, he said, his voice full of a profound, heartbreaking clarity, you've detrained yourself from everything except him. You're not his 17-year-old daughter anymore, Nola, but you're still his soldier. You're still standing at attention, just waiting for his next inspection. That word, detrain, it floored me. He was right. Oh God, he was so right. My entire life, I had been trained by two opposing forces, the U.S. Navy and my father. The Navy trained me to be autonomous, to lead, to command. My father had trained me, for 18 years before that, to salute, to obey, to anticipate his moods, to accept his verdicts. And when faced with his threat, I hadn't reacted like a commander. I had reacted like his soldier, reverting to my oldest, deepest training. Clean your weapon, brace for impact. So what do? I whispered, my voice finally breaking. The question felt huge, bottomless. How do I detrain from him? David reached across the table and laid his hand over mine, his skin warm against my cold fingers. You're a commander, he said, as if it were the simplest, most obvious fact in the world. Commanders don't ask for respect, Nola. They command it. They set the terms of engagement, even with themselves. He locked his eyes on mine. It's time you command yourself to have peace. Tears I didn't even know were there welled up and spilled over. He was offering me an anchor, a new frame for a fight I didn't know how to win. He reached over with his other hand and gently wiped a tear from my cheek with his thumb. He handed me a paper towel from the counter. And, he added, a small tired smile playing on his lips, please, for the love of God, stop cleaning your weapons in the kitchen. It freaks me out. I let out a choked, watery laugh. It was the first time I had laughed in weeks. David's words gave me the why. But I still needed the how. The next day, I made an appointment with the base chaplain. My chaplain wasn't a soft man. He was a tough-as-nails former Marine who had seen 2 tours in Fallujah before he found God. He was the kind of man who understood that some devils are real. His office was simple, pragmatic, decorated with little more than a U.S. flag and a simple cross. Chaplain, I started, sitting stiffly in the chair opposite his desk. I have a family problem. He held up a hand, stopping me before I could even continue. Commander, he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. Family is the hardest fight there is. It's the one we're not issued armor for. He leaned forward, his expression kind but intense. We're trained to fight the enemy without, not the enemy within. And certainly not the enemy who used to be within. That one sentence, the enemy who used to be within. He got it instantly. I told him everything. I told him about the empty pews at my wedding, the $8,400 text, the $1 response, my father showing up at the diner. And finally, I told him about the letter, the one now sitting in my desk under my pistol. He listened, his hands steepled, nodding slowly. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't horrified. He just listened. When I finished, the silence in the room felt heavy. God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers, Commander Flores, he said finally. But you are trying to win the wrong war. What do you mean, sir? You're fighting for him to see the truth. You're fighting for an apology. You're fighting for him to finally, just once, look at you and say, "You were right, Nola. I was wrong. I'm proud of you." I just stared at him. He had just read my entire soul. Yes, I admitted, my voice small. I guess I am. I want him to understand what he did. The chaplain shook his head slowly, a sad wisdom in his eyes. He never will. His pride won't let him, and you will break yourself on the rocks of that expectation. So I just lose? The word tasted like ash. No, the chaplain said, leaning in. You win. Oh, you'll win, Commander. How? He smiled, a small, tough smile. You will win on the day you no longer need him to understand. You will win on the day his approval means nothing to you, one way or the other. Victory isn't making him apologize. Victory is when you realize you don't need him to. That sentence liberated me more than any order I'd ever received. I walked out of his office with a new set of orders. David had given me the diagnosis. I was still my father's soldier. The chaplain had given me the new mission objective. Victory wasn't the goal. The survival of my own heart was. The clarity I gained from David and the chaplain felt like a new set of armor. I had a mission. Protect my own peace. I had a new understanding. I wasn't fighting to be understood anymore. I felt calm. I felt solid. But the peace I had found internally was not a peace the enemy externally was willing to accept. My father, having failed to intimidate me at my home base, having failed to break me with a direct, written threat, shifted his strategy. He couldn't win a direct fight. So he did what all failing tyrants do. He retreated and launched a social war. He activated his flying monkeys. It started subtly. I was scrolling through Facebook one evening, a rare moment of downtime, and I saw a post from a cousin back in Richmond. It was just a generic, unfollowed a bunch of people to keep my peace. Family first. I checked. Sure enough, he had unfollowed me. Then, a few days later, a post from an aunt, my father's sister. It was one of those passive-aggressive, preachy memes. A picture of a sunset with text over it. Some children are so full of pride they forget the people who gave them everything. Another one. A family is a tree. One broken branch doesn't kill the tree. These little digital barbs, these public-facing whispers, were designed for me to see. They were his way of signaling to the entire family network that I was the broken branch. I was the prideful child. They were like mosquitoes, small, annoying, and poisonous, buzzing just at the edge of my hearing. They were designed to make me feel isolated, to make me doubt my own reality. I ignored them. I kept my new mission objective in mind. His approval means nothing. But my father was just warming up. When the passive-aggressive posts didn't get a reaction, he deployed his heavy artillery. He sent in my Aunt Carol. The phone rang on a Saturday afternoon. I was at home, reading a book. I saw the name on the caller ID and my stomach clenched. Aunt Carol. She was my father's older sister, the family matriarch, the one who saw herself as the fixer of all problems. I took a breath. "Command your peace, Nola," I answered. "Nola, honey." Her voice was just as I remembered, dripping with a fake, saccharine sweetness, like cheap honey. "How are you, baby? We just never hear from you." "I'm fine, Aunt Carol. It's good to hear from you. How are things in Richmond?" "Oh, same old, Same old, she breezed. And then, the pivot. Listen, honey, I'm calling because, well, your mother is just worried sick about you, and about your father. And there it is, the guilt trip. She says you won't take her calls, you won't answer your father. Nola, honey, he's your father. He's been through so much. This whole thing with your brother's wedding falling apart. You need to call him. I kept my voice calm, level, just like I was taught. Aunt Carol, I appreciate that you're concerned. I really do. But my father and I are working through our own issues. And he didn't come to my wedding. Silence. The fake sweetness evaporated instantly. The temperature of the call dropped 30 degrees. When she spoke again, her voice was cold, hard. And you think you're completely innocent in this? She snapped. I was taken aback. I don't know what you mean. Oh, come on, Nola. You've always been difficult, ever since you were a little girl. Always so serious, so intense, too arrogant for your own good. You know, she said, her voice taking on a tone of cruel psychoanalysis. You're just like him. That hit me like a physical blow. It stunned me, just like him. The one thing I'd spent my entire life, my entire career, trying not to be. The man whose control I'd fled. The man whose cruelty I despised. And here she was, in one sentence, erasing all of it, branding me with his face. This is the classic tactic of the abuser's network. They turn your greatest pain into your greatest flaw. I am nothing like him, I said, my voice shaking, all my careful composure gone. You're tearing this family apart, Nola, she said, her voice rising, now in full-on attack mode. Your mother is a wreck, your father is miserable, and all you can think about is your own selfish pride. All because they missed one party. That was it. The gaslighting, the minimization, the blame shift. It was all there. The old Nola would have cried. She would have apologized. She would have promised to call just to make the yelling stop. But the old Nola wasn't home. My voice came out as cold as steel. No, Aunt Carol, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I'm just refusing to continue being the punching bag. This conversation is over. Goodbye. I hung up the phone. And then I sat there, staring at the wall, and my hands were trembling, violently. My body was reacting even if my mind had held the line. It had cost me. That strength had cost me. But my father wasn't done. The social attack had failed. The family attack had failed. So he went for the kill. He went after my career. A few days later, Chief Ramos was back at my door. This time, he looked even more uncomfortable than when he'd seen my father at the diner. He looked angry. Ma'am, he said, closing the door behind him, we have a problem. What is it, Chief? I've received 2 calls this morning, one to my office, one to the main command line. He took a breath. They were from old friends of your father's from Richmond. They were asking invasive questions, ma'am. They were trying to dig into your service record. They were fishing, trying to find any disciplinary actions or complaints against you. My blood didn't just run cold. It froze. He was actively trying to destroy my career. He was using his network of important men in Virginia to try and get me fired, to ruin my reputation. He was trying to burn down the one thing I'd ever built for myself, the one thing he had never been able to control. I looked at Ramos. He was waiting for my reaction, waiting to see if his commander would crack. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out over the base. Let them call, Chief, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. They won't find anything because there is nothing to find. My record is clean. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chief. That will be all. He left. I stayed at the window for a long time. I was furious. But more than that, for the first time, I was truly, deeply afraid. That night, I didn't tell David. I didn't want to worry him. But after he was asleep, I went into the bathroom, turned on the shower so he wouldn't hear. And I sat on the floor, and I cried. Rumors. They're not like bullets. You can't see them coming. You can't shoot back. They're like chemical weapons. They just creep into all the cracks and poison everything long after the battle is over. And I knew with a chilling certainty, this battle was far from over. The failure of his social and professional attacks drove my father to a place I had never truly believed he would go. He had tried to isolate me, to poison my relationships, and to destroy my career. When all of it failed, when I refused to break, he picked up his nuclear weapon. He decided to have me arrested. It was a Tuesday. I was in the middle of a high-level briefing in the command center on base. We were going over intelligence for an upcoming mission. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of the monitors. My phone, set on the table, was on silent, as per protocol. But then it vibrated. I ignored it. It vibrated again, and again. A frantic, insistent buzzing. My second-in-command, Chief Ramos, paused. "Ma'am." A cold dread washed over me. No one called me like that. Not unless someone was dead. I picked up the phone. The screen was lit up with notifications. Missed call, Norfolk PD. Missed call, Norfolk PD. Missed call, David missed call, Norfolk PD. My blood turned to ice. Why was the Norfolk Police Department calling me? A text message popped up. It was David. "Your father called the cops. They are at the house. Come home now." As I read it, the phone vibrated again. "Norfolk PD," I answered. "Commander Flores," a gruff voice said. "This is she." "Ma'am, this is Officer McCann with the Norfolk PD. We are at your residence. We've received a report of a domestic theft." The room started to spin. "A theft?" "Yes, ma'am. The reporting party is a Mr. Flores. He's here on scene. He's stating you've stolen a significant amount of money from the family." I stood up so fast I knocked my chair over. My coffee cup went flying, splashing hot coffee across the briefing table and onto the floor. The room fell silent. Every officer in the room was staring at me. "I'm on my way," I said, and I hung up. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't apologize for the mess. I just looked at Ramos. "Chief, you have the con." "Ma'am?" "I'm gone." I ran. I sprinted out of the command center, down the hall, my combat boots echoing on the polished linoleum. I didn't sign out. I just ran. I burst through the doors of the building and into the parking lot. I drove like hell. My heart was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. I ran 2 red lights. I was going 80 in a 45. I didn't care. The entire time my mind was racing. Police? Theft? A report? This wasn't a family argument anymore. This was a criminal accusation. This could end my career, my security clearance, everything. He's trying to put me in jail. He's trying to destroy me. I skidded to a stop at the end of my street. I could see them from a block away. The scene was a suburban nightmare. 2 Norfolk PD cruisers were parked at the curb, their lights on, painting my house and my neighbors' houses in flashing strobes of red and blue. And my neighbors, they were watching. Of course they were. Mrs. Gable from 2 doors down was peeking through her blinds. The family across the street was standing on their porch, and he was there. My father. He was standing on my front lawn, his face red, gesticulating wildly, performing for the 2 officers. He looked like the perfect victim, an elderly, distinguished gentleman, a headmaster, just trying to reason with his unhinged criminal daughter. And on the porch, standing like a statue, was David. His arms were crossed. He wasn't yelling. He was just containing. Watching. A solid, unmovable object. I threw the car into park, didn't even turn it off. I jumped out, still in my full combat uniform, and I strode onto the lawn. The moment my father saw me, his performance stopped, and he smirked. It was small. It was almost invisible. But I saw it. It was a tiny, triumphant lifting at the corner of his mouth. It was the smirk of a man who had finally cornered his prey. He had won. He had successfully brought the power of the state to my doorstep. He had humiliated me in front of my neighbors. He had interrupted my vital work. He had me, a commander in the U.S. Navy, standing on her lawn being questioned by police. He was waiting for me to cry, to scream, to fall to my knees and beg him to make it stop. That smirk was the single greatest mistake he ever made. In that instant, the panic vanished. The fear, the adrenaline, the pounding heart, it all just stopped. It evaporated, and my SEAL training took over. My breathing evened out. My focus narrowed. The world went silent, except for the man in front of me. This was no longer my father. This was a hostile. This was an engagement. And I was in command. A new kind of anger, a cold, clear Arctic anger, settled over me. An older officer, the one with McCann on his name tag, approached me. He looked tired, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Ma'am, you're Nola Flores." "I am, officer," I said. My voice was calm, level. It didn't shake. "Okay," he sighed. "Here's the deal. Your father here says you stole $8,400 from him. Says you transferred it right out of his account. We're looking at grand larceny, ma'am. That's a serious problem for you." "I understand," I said. I looked past him, at my father, who was watching with that same hungry, expectant look. I looked back at the officer. "Officer, may I see your body camera?" He blinked, surprised. "What?" "Your body camera. Is it on?" "Yes, ma'am, it's been on since we arrived." "Good." I looked straight into the lens of the camera on his chest. Then I looked back into his eyes. "Officer, what my father told you is a lie. This is not a theft. This is a family matter that he has escalated by filing a false police report." My father started sputtering. "A lie? How dare you? I have the statements. You—" Officer McCann held up a hand. "Let her talk, sir." I kept my eyes on the officer. "Sir, the truth is, my father demanded $8,400 from me via text message. I did not steal it. I refused to give it to him, and this is my response." I reached into the pocket of my uniform. My father's eyes widened, then narrowed. For a second, I think he thought I was reaching for a weapon. I pulled out my cell phone. I unlocked it. I opened my banking app. I went to my transfer history. And I held the phone up for the officer to see. His eyes scanned the screen. He saw the date. He saw the recipient, Flores. He saw the memo. "Wishing you all the best." And he saw the amount. 1 euros. The officer stared at my phone. He looked at me. He looked over at my father, who was now silent, his face turning from red to a pale, mottled white. The officer looked back at me. He had been a cop for a long time. I could see the understanding click into place. He had seen this play before. If you've ever had a moment where you finally stood your ground and the truth was so simple, so powerful that it silenced your abuser, hit that like button and type $1 in the comments. You know what that dollar means. I put my phone back in my pocket. "I transferred him $1, officer," I said, my voice still cold, still calm. "And then I blocked his number. This isn't a theft. This is a desperate attempt to control me, and I am filing a report of my own. For harassment." Officer McCann stared at my phone. The 1.0 transfer glowed in the twilight, illuminated by the flashing red and blue police lights. He stared at it for a long, silent moment. I didn't rush him. I let him process it. Then, slowly, he lifted his head and looked at me. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a weary, professional understanding. He'd seen this movie before, just with different actors. Then he turned and looked at my father. The entire dynamic on the lawn shifted in that single second. The professional deference he had shown to the distinguished gentleman, the headmaster, evaporated. It was gone. He no longer saw a victim. He saw a problem. "Mr. Flores," Officer McCann said, his voice now flat, all patience gone. "This appears to be a civil matter, not a criminal one. You're—" My father saw the power slipping away. He saw his narrative collapsing, and he panicked. "A lie!" he roared, his face contorting with rage. He took a step toward me, his hand raised, pointing a finger at my face. "She is an ungrateful wretch. After everything I did for her, everything I paid for, she—" He lunged forward. In a split second, David moved, stepping directly between us, his body a solid wall. "Hey, you don't come at her," David said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. My father, stopped by David's presence, just raged. Get out of my way, boy. This is my family. This is my daughter. He was completely unhinged, losing his last shred of control in front of the neighbors, the police, and the husband he had refused to acknowledge. He had lost. He just didn't know it yet. This was the moment. The old Nola would have hidden behind David. The old Nola would have flinched. The old Nola would have wept. But as I looked at the man who had haunted my entire life, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel panic. I felt nothing. Just the cold, clear calm of a mission objective. I put my hand on David's chest. I got this, I said quietly. He looked at me, saw the look in my eyes, and gave a single, firm nod. He stepped aside, though he stayed close. I didn't step back. I stepped forward. I closed the distance between myself and my father by one step. I was now directly in his personal space. He was taller than me, but in that moment, I felt like a giant. I did not speak as his daughter. I did not speak as the girl he had shamed over a prom dress. I spoke as Commander Flores. I inhaled, drew the air from my diaphragm, and I used my command voice. The command voice is not a yell. Yelling is emotional. Yelling is a loss of control. The command voice is the opposite. It's a sound forged in training, designed to cut through the noise of gunfire, the roar of a helicopter, or the panic of a firefight. It is sharp, it is full of authority, and it is not a request. It is an order. Enough! The word cracked through the evening air like a rifle shot. It wasn't just my father who froze. He stopped mid-rant, his mouth open, his hand still raised. It was everyone. I saw the two police officers, both men, both armed, both veterans of the street, instinctively straighten their postures. It was a reflex. They heard that voice, and their training kicked in. They stood at attention. The neighbors, peeking through their blinds, probably flinched. My father? He just stared, stunned, as if I had slapped him. I had never, ever, in my entire 32 years, used that voice on him. He had only ever heard the voice of his daughter. The whisper, the plea, the apology. He was now face to face with the commander, and he was utterly, completely disarmed. The silence that followed was absolute. David, seizing the opening I had created, stepped forward, addressing the officers. His voice was firm, calm, and legal. Officers, I am the co-owner of this property. This man, Mr. Flores, is no longer welcome here. He has filed a false report and is causing a disturbance. I want him removed from our property, right now. The younger officer, who had been silent this whole time, just nodded. Yes, sir. He and McCann moved in unison. Mr. Flores, McCann said, you need to come with us. You have to leave the property now. You can't do this, my father shrieked, but the authority was gone. It was just noise now. I'm the one who called you. He is the criminal, he yelled, pointing at me. Sir, the situation is resolved. You need to leave, McCann said, his hand now resting on his hip, no longer friendly. Let's go. They began to escort him, one on each side, toward the curb, toward his car. And I watched his face. It was the most heartbreaking and the most liberating moment of my life. I watched the rage on his face curdle. It turned into a desperate, sputtering confusion. He looked at the cops. He looked at David. He looked at the neighbors. He looked at me. He didn't understand. How had this happened? He had all the cards. He was the headmaster. He was the father. He was the one in charge. And in that confusion, I saw the final stage. Impotence. He was powerless. He had fired his last and most powerful weapon, public humiliation, false arrest, and it had not only failed, it had backfired spectacularly. It had imploded, taking his power with it. He had lost. But his narcissism couldn't let it go. He had to have the last word. As the officers got him to his car, he wrenched his arm free for one last, desperate shout. He pointed at me, standing on my own porch, in my own uniform, next to my husband. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated bitterness. You think your rank makes you right? He screamed, his voice cracking, the sound echoing down the quiet suburban street. You think those medals make you better than me? That was it. The core of it all. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about rank. He thought this was about a power struggle. I stood on my porch. I didn't yell back. I just waited. I let his voice echo until it was gone, until the only sound was the hum of the police radio. I let the silence hang in the air. Then I spoke. My voice was quiet, calm, and it carried in the still evening air. "No, Dad," I said. I waited until he met my eyes. "It doesn't mean I'm right." I let the words land. "It just means I've earned this peace." His face crumpled. He had no answer. He got in his car. The police waited until he drove away. Officer McCann walked back up to me. He tipped his hat. "Ma'am, sorry for the disturbance. I'll have a note of this false report put in the system." "Thank you, officer." He and his partner left. The flashing lights disappeared down the street. The neighbor's blinds snapped shut. It was over. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the quiet night air. David put his arm around me. I turned, walked into my house, and I locked the front door. After the confrontation on the lawn, a profound quiet settled over our lives. The victory hadn't felt triumphant, not in the way you see in movies. There was no parade. It just felt finished. The silence from my family, which had once been a weapon they used against me, was now a shield I used for myself. I had my boundary. I had my peace. Months passed. The humid Virginia spring gave way to the thick, oppressive heat of a Norfolk summer. David and I settled into our life. We worked. We grilled burgers on the back porch. We took our dog to the beach. We lived. The drama felt like it had happened in another lifetime, to another person. My phone remained silent. My father, my mother, my brother. They had, for all intents and purposes, vanished. Then, one evening in late August, my phone rang. It wasn't a local Norfolk number. It was a Richmond area code. My heart didn't leap with panic this time. It just sank. A heavy, tired feeling. I looked at the screen. It wasn't my father. It wasn't my mother. It was Pastor Lewis, the pastor from the church back home, the one who had known our family for 20 years. "David," I called out. "Pastor Lewis is calling me." David came in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He just nodded, his face serious. "You gonna answer it?" "I guess I have to." I stepped out onto the back porch, the humidity clinging to my skin, and answered the phone. "Nola, this is Pastor Lewis." His voice was just as I remembered it, deep, gentle. But tonight, it sounded impossibly weary. "Hello, Pastor. It's good to hear your voice. And yours, my child. And yours." He sighed. "Nola, I'm not calling to intervene. I'm not calling to ask you to do anything. I'm just calling because I felt you had a right to know." A cold dread, different from fear, settled on me. This was the sound of bad news. "What is it, Pastor?" It's your brother. His wedding, Nola. It's been called off." I just stood there, silent, listening to the cicadas buzz in the trees. "Called off?" "His fiancée," the pastor continued, his voice heavy with disapproval. "She found out he'd been lying to her about his finances, about the money your father was giving him. And, well, it seems there was also another woman involved. It's a real mess, Nola. A true, heartbreaking mess." I closed my eyes. The golden boy. The one who could do no wrong. The one whose wedding was so important they had to destroy mine to prepare for it. All of it, a lie. I don't know what to say, Pastor." "There's nothing to say," he said gently. "But there's more, and this is the harder part. It's about your father." I gripped the railing of the porch. "His businesses, Nola, the school, his investments. It's all in trouble, serious trouble." He proceeded to lay out the details in his somber, clerical voice. The private school's enrollment was way down. My father, in his arrogance, had apparently been using funds from one venture to cover the debts of another. He was being sued. "There are contractors in Richmond who haven't been paid, Nola. His property taxes are severely overdue. The man, The man is too proud to ask for help. And he's drowning in his own pride. He paused, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. He's losing it all, Nola. The reputation, the money, the empire he spent his whole life building. It's collapsing. He waited for me to say something. What did he expect me to say? Good. He deserves it. I told you so? I had thought, in my darkest moments, that if this day ever came, I would feel victorious. I would feel a sense of vindication. Hallelujah, justice. But I didn't. I didn't feel a shred of triumph. I didn't feel a single ounce of satisfaction. I just felt an overwhelming, heavy sadness. It was like watching a great ancient tree finally rot from the inside and crash to the ground. It was a tragedy. It was a waste. Karma, I whispered, more to myself than to him. It isn't sweet, it's just tired. That's a very wise way to put it, child, Pastor Lewis said. He built his house on sand, and the storm came. Listen to me, Nola. I'm telling you this so you hear it from a friend, not from a stranger. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to call. You don't need to fix this. I wanted you to know. He paused, and his voice softened. Pray for him, Nola. Not for him to change, but for you to be at peace. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up. I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the sunset. The empire was gone. The headmaster was just a man in debt. The golden boy was a cheater. The entire foundation of my childhood, the family I had tried so hard to be good enough for, was a house of cards. That night, I did pray. For the first time in years, I really prayed. I knelt by my bed like I did when I was a little girl. God, I whispered, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. I don't want him to be hurt. I don't want him to suffer. I just want him to stop hurting me. It wasn't a prayer for justice. It was a prayer of surrender. A prayer to just let it go. I told David everything. He just listened, holding my hand. After I was done, he was quiet for a long time. So, he said finally, Are you going to drive up to Richmond? See them? The question hung in the air, and the old me, the old Nola, screamed inside my head. Yes, go, he's hurt, mom's alone, fix it, this is your chance, be the responsible one, be the good daughter, go and save them, and they will finally love you. That voice, that programming, was so deep. The instinct to be the family fixer was a reflex. I looked at David, I looked at the piece of my own living room. I thought about the girl in the prom dress. I thought about the stolen Annapolis letter. I thought about the empty pews at my wedding. I thought about the smirk on my father's face as the police cars flashed, and I made a choice. I shook my head. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it was the strongest it had ever been. No, if I go now, I'm not Nola. I'm the savior. I'm Nola the responsible, coming in to clean up the mess. I'm falling right back into the role they wrote for me. I can't. I won't do it anymore. David's face relaxed into a smile. He nodded, full of support. You're right, he said. Protecting your peace isn't revenge, it's just good stewardship. I knew he was right. I wasn't their enemy, but I wasn't their lifeguard either. I couldn't save them from a tide they had created themselves. A few days later, I went to a drugstore. I bought a simple postcard, one with a picture of the Norfolk waterfront. I wrote 4 words on it, thinking of you both. I didn't sign it. I didn't put a return address on it. I dropped it in a mailbox. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an invitation. It was compassion. From a very, very safe distance, the postcard was sent. The fragile peace I had built continued. The summer heat finally broke, and the cool, crisp air of late September settled over Norfolk. Life went on. And then I got the call that every person in the back of their mind dreads. The 3 a.m. call. In America, we have a name for this. It's the call that never, ever brings good news. It's the call that rips you from sleep and plunges you into a nightmare. My phone, charging on the nightstand, lit up the dark bedroom. I fumbled for it, my heart already a cold stone in my stomach. It was my mother. I answered. Mom? Her voice wasn't a wail. It wasn't a scream. It was worse. It was a small, thin, shattered whisper. Nola, she wept. Nola, it's your father. The hospital. They said heart failure. The words just hung there in the dark. Heart failure, the 3 a.m. call. It had finally come. I didn't think. I didn't process. I just acted. The years of military training took over. In a crisis, you move. I'm coming, I said. My voice was flat, detached. David. I shook him awake. I have to go. It's my father. Heart failure. My mom's at the hospital in Richmond. He was awake in an instant, sitting up, already reaching for his keys. I'll drive you. No, I said, pulling on the jeans and sweater I'd left on the floor. I need to do this one alone. He understood. He just nodded, his face full of a sad, quiet support. Be safe. Call me the second you get there. I was out the door in under 3 minutes. The 3-hour drive from Norfolk to Richmond, up I-64 in the dead of night, was the longest drive of my life. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just empty. The dark, empty highway unspooled in front of my headlights. My mind was just blank. It was the strangest, most hollow feeling I've ever known. It was as if my entire emotional system had just shut down, unable to process the overload. The tyrant was dying. The monster who had haunted my childhood was in a hospital bed. The man who had smirked at me on my lawn was now, himself, broken. I should have felt something. Relief? No. Sadness? No. Vengeance? No. I just felt numb. I drove past the exits for Williamsburg, past the dark, sleeping silhouettes of the colonial buildings, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I just focused on the mechanics of driving. Stay in the lane. Watch your speed. Keep moving. I was a machine, executing a new, final, terrible mission. I finally pulled into the parking garage of the Richmond Hospital just before dawn. The sky was a cold, bruised purple. I walked through the automatic doors. The hospital lobby was quiet, smelling of stale coffee and antiseptic. I found the intensive care unit, the ICU, on the 3rd floor. The moment the doors to the ICU hissed open, the smell hit me. That cold, sterile, chemical smell of a place where life and death are in constant clinical negotiation. It was quiet, but not silent. It was filled with the low, rhythmic, inhuman beeping of machines. And I saw her. My mother. She was huddled in a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, under the harsh fluorescent lights. She looked tiny, small. She was co-rocking in her seat, clutching a paper cup of coffee, her face pale and terrified. This wasn't the woman who had stood by, silent while I was tormented. This wasn't the accomplice. This was just a scared, old woman who was about to lose her entire world. She looked up as I approached, her eyes wide. She didn't know what to do. I could see the conflict on her face. She didn't know whether to hug me or to apologize or to yell at me for not being there sooner. In the end, she did none of them. She just pointed. He's in there, Nola. Room 312. I just nodded. I walked past her, down the hall, to room 312. I stopped at the door. I took a deep breath, just like I did before I stepped out of an airplane. But this was harder. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The man in that bed was not my father. My father was a giant, a tyrant, a force of nature who filled every room with his rage and his ego. This man was weak. He was small, pale, and buried under a web of tubes and wires. An IV snaked into his arm. A heart monitor beeped in a steady, slow rhythm next to his bed. An oxygen tube was looped under his nose. He looked frail, vulnerable. For the first time in my life, he looked horribly human. I just stood there. I didn't move. I just stared. The man who had taught me to salute before I could even wear a uniform was now completely, utterly helpless. A nurse, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, bustled in. "Oh," she said softly, seeing me. "You must be the daughter." "I am." He's been in and out," she said, checking his chart. "He's a fighter, your dad." She smiled at me. "He's very proud of you, you know." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. "What?" "Oh, yeah," she said, oblivious to the bomb she had just detonated. "When he was first admitted, before he got real bad, he was telling all of us about you. Said his daughter was a Navy SEAL. Said you were tougher than half the Navy. He was so proud." He was proud. The words I had craved my entire life. The validation I had nearly killed myself to earn. The simple acknowledgement I had been desperate for. And he couldn't say it to me. He had told a stranger. He had told a nurse. But he had never, not once, told me. I had to grip the railing of the bed to stay standing. The nurse, finished with her checks, smiled kindly and left the room. And I was alone with him. I stood there for an hour. Or maybe it was 10 minutes. Time had stopped. And then, his eyelids fluttered. He woke up. His eyes, cloudy and unfocused, scanned the room. And then they landed on me. He stared. He blinked as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His voice was a dry, papery, thin whisper. A thready sound, barely audible over the beep of the machines. "Didn't think you'd come," he wheezed. The honesty of the moment was brutal. I couldn't lie to him. Not now. "I almost didn't," I whispered back. We just looked at each other, the tyrant and the soldier, father and daughter. We just stared. All the anger, all the years of pain, just hanging in the sterile air between us. His eyes drifted down to my sweater and jeans. "You're not in uniform," he whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He had last seen me in my combat uniform, a warrior. I think he meant that I had finally stood down, that I wasn't here as a soldier. His eyes found mine again. I was trying to make you strong," he whispered. A single, hot tear finally broke free and rolled down my cheek. "You did," I confirmed. "You succeeded, Dad." I leaned in, my voice shaking. "But you also made me so lonely." He closed his eyes. I saw a single tear escape from under his eyelid and trace a path through the wrinkles on his temple. He was quiet for a long time. I thought he had fallen back asleep. And then he said it. The confession. The final, terrible, freeing truth that broke everything inside of me. "I never hated you, Nola," he whispered, his eyes still closed. "You know, I just..." He took a ragged breath. I just don't know how to love someone I can't control." And that was it. My entire life, my childhood, the prom dress, the stolen letter, the empty pews, the $8,400, the police cars. I just don't know how to love someone I can't control. All of it, summarized in one final heartbreaking sentence. The rage, the anger, the 20 years of resentment, it just dissolved. It didn't vanish, but it transformed. It became just a profound, profound sadness. I pulled the chair closer. I sat down. And for the first time since I was a little girl, I reached out and I took his hand. It felt frail and cold in mine. "You don't have to control me anymore, Dad," I whispered, my tears falling onto his hand. You just need to rest." My father passed away 6 months after that night in the ICU. His funeral was held in Richmond at the same old stone church where he had refused to watch me get married. At my mother's request, I wore my uniform. Not my combat fatigues, but my full navy dress whites. The formal, pristine white uniform with the gold buttons and the black tie. I stood in the front pew, next to my mother and brother. I felt the eyes of the Richmond community on me. They weren't looks of pity or judgment anymore, just Observation: I wasn't the prodigal daughter. I wasn't the rebellious one. I was just Nola, a commander in the United States Navy, there to bury her father. My mother, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, reached over and squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. We didn't need to say anything. The war was over. We were just two women, standing together in the wreckage, beginning to sort through it. About a month later, a letter arrived. It was from my father's attorney. It wasn't a legal document. It was a personal letter, one he had written after that night in the hospital and left with his lawyer to be delivered to me only after his death. My hands were steady as I opened it. I sat with David on our back porch in Norfolk, the same place I'd received so many terrible updates. This one was different. His handwriting was shaky, the loops of the letters frail, but the words were his. Nola, I don't know how to apologize properly. I was never taught how. I've always thought that saying sorry makes a man look small. But maybe being small is where forgiveness begins. That night you showed up at the hospital. I didn't think you would come. I wouldn't have. You were always the stronger one. Stronger than me. I hated that. And I loved it. I'm not writing to ask you to forget. I'm just writing to explain. The call to the police? That was a coward's move. I knew it then. I know it now. I couldn't control you, so I tried to break you. I couldn't check myself. I saw red. I'm sorry for the shame I brought you. I was proud of you. I just didn't know how to love someone I couldn't control. You were right. You will do better than me. That is what every parent should truly want for their child. Dad. I folded the letter. I didn't cry. I just felt a quiet, final release. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was an answer. It was the period at the end of a long, painful sentence. I took the letter inside to the desk in my office. I opened the drawer that held my service pistol. I took the threatening, hateful letter he had first sent me and I tore it into tiny pieces. Then I took this new letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in the drawer right beside my medals. The poison was gone. Only the man remained. Life continued. It settled into a new, gentle rhythm. My mother and I started talking, really talking, not about the past, not about him. We didn't need to. We started with Sundays, a phone call every Sunday afternoon. We talked about the weather. We talked about David's new project at work. She told me about a book she was reading. We talked about small things, normal things. And for the first time in my life, I heard my mother laugh. Not the high-strung, nervous titter she always had around my father, but a real, genuine, light laugh. It was the most beautiful sound. The next spring, I was invited to give the commencement speech at a local high school in Virginia Beach. I stood on that stage, in my dress whites again, looking out at 300 young, hopeful, terrified faces. I didn't talk to them about war. I didn't talk to them about combat or Hell Week or jumping out of planes. I talked to them about the internal war. There will be people in your life, I said, my voice carrying over the quiet stadium, who will hurt you. They will hurt you deeply. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most will be the ones who hurt you the worst. I saw a few kids in the front row nod, their eyes wide. And you will carry that hurt. You will carry it like a 100-pound rucksack on a 20-mile march. It will be heavy. And you will have every right to carry it. You will have every right to be angry. But I'm telling you, I leaned into the microphone, at some point, you have to learn to put it down. Not for them, I said. You don't put it down for them. You don't forgive them because they deserve it. You forgive them because you deserve to rest. The applause was staggering, but it was the look in the eyes of the students, that look of recognition, of release, that told me the message had landed. A year later, my life changed again. One of my new recruits, a young, fierce, incredibly smart woman from Ohio, knocked on my office door. She was one of the best I'd ever seen, a natural leader. Commander Flores, ma'am? Can I have a word? Of course, specialist. Come on in, close the door. She sat down, her hands twisting in her lap. She was trying to maintain her military bearing, but her eyes were brimming with tears. "Ma'am," she started, her voice shaking. "My family, back in Ohio, they disowned me when I enlisted. They said this wasn't a woman's job. They haven't spoken to me in 2 years. My heart ached. I knew this story. I'm getting married next month, ma'am," she continued, a tear finally escaping and rolling down her cheek. "My fiancé is a corpsman at Portsmouth. We're doing a small ceremony at the base chapel." She took a shaky breath. "And I don't have anyone to, you know, to walk you down the aisle," I finished for her, my voice soft. She nodded, wiping her face angrily. "I'm sorry to be unprofessional, ma'am. I was wondering, I wouldn't ask, but you're the one who. I was wondering if maybe you would do it." I looked at this strong, brilliant, brave young woman who had been abandoned for the same reason I had, for being strong. I didn't hesitate. "Specialist," I said, standing up. "It would be my absolute honor." And so, there I was, standing in a church again, the Norfolk-based chapel. I was in my full-dress whites. The sun streamed through the stained glass windows, but this time I wasn't standing alone at the back, waiting for a father who would never come. This time, I was the one they were waiting for. I stood next to this wonderful young woman in her simple white dress. I smiled at her. "You ready, soldier?" She smiled back, her eyes shining. "Ready, ma'am." "Then let's go." I offered her my arm. She took it. The music started. The doors opened. And I did not walk alone. I walked her down that aisle, my steps firm, my head held high. I walked her toward her future. I walked her to her fiancé, who was beaming. I did the part a father is supposed to do. I placed her hand in his. After the ceremony, at the small reception, she came up to me and gave me a hug so tight it almost cracked a rib. She pulled back, her eyes full of a gratitude that was so much deeper than just that day. She looked me right in the eye, and she whispered the 6 words that I had waited my entire life to hear. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for showing up." I held her tight. "Thank you for showing up." And as I stood there, outside that chapel, with the sound of laughter and celebration behind me, I finally understood. The pain, the letters, the empty chairs, the $1 transfer. All of it. It hadn't been a curse. It had been training. It had been my real hell week. It had forged me. It had prepared me for this. Because sometimes the only way you can truly heal is by becoming the very person you yourself once needed. Thank you for listening to my story. For so long, I felt invisible, like I was fighting a war no one else could see. But you showed up. You listened. If you are out there feeling unseen or carrying that weight, my hope is that you find the strength to set it down. You deserve to rest. If my story resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel for more stories of healing and resilience. And in the comments, let me know one word that describes your own journey. I see you.